Martin Steer, who's a farmer and an advisor who's been using both the Land app and before the Land app was around, was very familiar with the stewardship schemes, where we're going to be talking through some of the options previously mentioned. So the ones that Alex has discussed, plus also talking a bit around these wild edges, the concept of taking out marginal land of your farm and looking at certain stewardship options will help that. So Martin, if you want to come off mute and turn your video on and give yourself a bit of an introduction, and then I'll share my screen and I'll pull up the Land app and we can start talking through some through a demo farm.
Oh, thanks very much, Dan, for the introduction. Yeah, so you and I are going to sort of develop a bit of a scheme together on screen, I believe, which will be fun and a challenge for me, but I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, no problem at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just start by doing our usual workflow, which is I've loaded up the Land app. I'm assuming everyone on the call has at least registered with the Land app and got an account, and therefore you'll be met with your maps dashboard. And I'm just going to create a new map called Norney. It's probably the Land app's most popular farm. It's actually our founder's farm. But what I wanted to do is use this next 20 minutes to really talk through how you can use the Land app to design a scheme ready for the submissions later this year. And we're going to be building that scheme off the principles mentioned before. So let's look at the farm shape, let's look at the farm size, let's look at the field sizes, and let's just think through some of the options and how they might fit in. So the first part of the workflow is defining the boundary. So obviously stewardship requires you to have an SBI number anyway. So I'm going to hit the import from Rural Payment Agency button. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to download just the land covers for today and the hedgerow data. Land parcels we can bring down at a later date if we need, but it just keeps the map a bit cleaner. And by hitting the import, what that does is that goes and fetches that data from the Rural Payment Agency and plonks my map nicely on the screen for me. So I suppose the first step, just to show you before we do, is we're just going to jump straight into a Countryside Stewardship template. There are other templates available, which we'll come on to in a moment, but I'm just going to get you, Martin, to firstly just think of some whole field options that you would apply to this farm. So a bit of context, it's in the Surrey Hills AONB. It's predominantly grassland, but I do have an arable field down here, which is in Lucerne. But the other two main fields are, I would say, fairly neutral grassland. They haven't been modified or enriched fairly recently. So there's, I suppose, a place to start would be maybe on these two grasslands here. What would you suggest?
Well, I mean, why don't we go for the legume-rich herb sward for starters?
Yeah. So we can certainly put that in. I think, Alex, you mentioned that the GS4 is one that can be used both on temporary and permanent grassland. Just double checking the eligibility on that, though. I think it was only for things that were cultivated in the last 5 years or seeded.
All right.
So yeah, it might be that this one needs to be GS2.
Let's do GS2 then. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, no, well spotted.
Yeah, no, it's okay. And it is worth noting that thanks to Alex, I would have remembered that, but if I hadn't, you have got, once you've assigned a field parcel an option, there is the link to the guidance document at the bottom right hand side of your screen, so you can dive straight into that just to show you that. Then we'll hopefully bring up all the guidance that Alex just mentioned around eligibility, payment rates, etc. So that's your GS2, and then we could
I've spotted a little dot in the middle there, which was excluded from the area. So have we got a pond there, or what have we got?
I think it's a good point. I think this is an ineligible tree feature. Let me just click on it and what is that? Yeah. Very well spotted.
Yeah. Because perhaps it might have come up on the data layers on the if we put the Ordnance Survey one, but if
it says it's a hard standing.
Standing. That's quite interesting. Yeah, might have even been an old dew pond.
Potentially, that's definitely a potential use for it. It's, I think, having walked around there might actually be an old site for. Yeah, there's some old rubble, so it might be a dew pond. I think we'd have to ask Tim if that's the case. So what we've done.
was thinking of was if it was sort of that, whether we, you know, a pond or something like that, we could have buffered it or put there. But while we're in that field, there's also some very significant trees looking at the aerial photography, and whether we put buffers around them. I was on a very interesting the Oxford Real Farming Conference. The Woodland Trust did a very interesting presentation saying, you know, we all say that a veteran tree has got you know, everyone's saying, oh well, the roots go out as far as the canopy, but that's actually incorrect. And it's a good metric is it's 15 times the diameter of the tree. You know, but giving some buffering around a tree, and I'm sure there's an option for that, and perhaps Alex could help us for buffering some trees.
Yeah, so what I've done is I've added a 14-meter buffer around those trees. Might be over exaggerating a little bit, but what that will then give us is the ability to assign those buffers an option. And I think infield buffering trees. I remember, it's a point feature. Yeah. Okay, bear with me.
The infield buffering trees tend to relate, if, for example, to intensive grassland, and on arable.
Yeah. So it may not be. I would say this is a low intensity grass field, so it might not be eligible. Then, Alex, is that correct?
But it's just using it as an example.
Exactly.
Using it as an example of how you could can look at trees and buffer them.
Yeah, exactly, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, with reference to that photo of the stag-headed oak, where, you know, the classic example of that happening is where it gets ploughed too close, and again with reference to the root systems tend to be, the majority of the root systems are a matter of a foot or two beneath the soil. They don't run sort of, you know, vertically down. So on, for example, arable land, improved grass and which is getting reseeded, I think those two tree buffering options are hugely worthwhile.
Yeah.
No, I think that, and that's quite a nice demonstration of just a certain bit of functionality there. So just to reiterate how I've done that is I've drawn a point feature to start with. So I've selected the field of question, drew a point feature, and then to that point feature, I've then added a buffer to it. So if this were, for example, an intensive grassland or even, you know, an arable field, you can then dictate the width of that buffer around that point. And the reason why that's important is that it might be that the shape you're drawing reduces the eligibility of the infield option that's happening around it as well. So adding a buffer, dictating the radius is a really nice workflow. And hypothetically, if this was an intensive grassland, for example, you could then add that buffer, add that option to the point feature. I think the payment rate is to do with the diameter of the tree. So instead of it being a set payment for hectareage, it's just if your tree is over a certain diameter, that gets a payment, I think, and that's me digging into the back of my brain. Alex, here we are. Yeah.
The payment.
Is that right? Payment rate. Yeah. Anyway,
it tends the payment rate. The payment rate relates to hectareage, but yeah, but the bigger the buffer, you know, the bigger the tree, sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So that actually might need a bit of an update, because I think that's just a fixed payment for the protection. So I might need to do some digging on that one, because that doesn't look like it's calculating as expected, but that's an easy fix.
Trust me to find the tricky one.
No. I think the point of this conversation is for us to demonstrate the workflow, and if there's a sticking point, we're happy to, you know, address it. So let's then maybe that GS4 thread that you just had then, Martin, around. I think that could potentially go in this field. So in terms of the field itself, it's currently in Lucerne, so it has been cultivated fairly recently. Therefore, it is eligible for GS4. What would be the you know, the added benefit of putting this in instead of, say, GS4, instead of just going straight back into an arable crop?
Well, it is potentially a fertility a fertility building crop. I mean, all right, it's after Lucerne, so that's not perhaps a good example. No, let's put it into GS4.
Yeah. One thing that's just come to mind as well is I know Tim and his family are exploring mob grazing, so that might be a good segue.
Yeah, no, it would be, yeah.
Into this field in particular, and potentially using this one as well, is it might be a good idea that's currently in Lucerne, is putting it down to a GS4 in preparation for years 3 and 4, potentially for the grazing to move in there. So I think they've got 50 head of sheep in here, and they're looking to divide that up. So should we talk through some stewardship options that divide this field?
Yes, you can. Yeah. So this is a feature that I really like, which is sort of the split feature, isn't it? And the trick that always to remember when you're splitting a field is to start the line from outside, isn't it, Dan? I think that's what, if you started outside the field, it works really well. It just takes a little bit of getting used to, but I use it regularly. There we are.
Yeah, exactly that. So it's the right click, choose the split function, and then you start your cursor outside of the field in question.
Yeah.
And then you just have to finish it outside and double click to finish. So this could be hypothetically one of the paddocks that we've just created. It is worth saying that you don't just have to do a single straight line during that split. If you wanted to get a bit more creative, you can, add some kinks in it, or it could be that it goes, for example, to that tree line and then across. So you don't have to just say that it's just one straight line. And actually, I'm not sure if you know this, Martin, as well. If you hold Shift on your keyboard, although I don't really use this, you can freehand draw a split, so you can make a wiggly line as well.
Yeah, and of course, once you've drawn it, you can always go back in and drag nodes about, which is the old-fashioned way that I've done it.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, you can edit the shapes of those. I would always just edge on the side of caution, changing the shape of the field, because as soon as you drag a feature, for example, like this, you've now got two features overlapping, and therefore your eligibility or your total area is going to be incorrect on that output form.
Yeah.
So Martin, let's just say hypothetically that we were going to then follow Hugh's principle of wild edge. So should we talk through the planting hedgerows,
Yes,
and then potentially adding a buffer to those hedgerows as part of the stewardship scheme?
Yeah, and I think, planting a hedgerow, we're going to need to protect it. So I think we ought to have a bit of a, I think we ought to claim for some sheep netting, some fencing, and I think we're going to need to put a gate in because we're splitting these fields up. And of course, there's always the options of water troughs and hard standings to put the water troughs on.
Yeah, perfect. So what I've done is I've drawn my BN11, which is my planting new hedgerows. And then what you mentioned is putting the FG2 in, which is that sheep netting. So the way I would do it as a bit of a shortcut is I would just duplicate that hedgerow. So I've now clicked duplicate, and there's 2 hedgerows on top of one another. And then what you can do is you can move that duplicated one in field a little bit.
Yeah,
like so, and it's following the same shape. And then edit it just on those edges to make it slightly neater. So for example, I've added a point, and I'm going to do the hold A on my keyboard and delete the other points. So therefore what I've got is I've got a duplicated line using the same structure as the hedgerow, but I'm now going to be able to assign that line FG2.
Yeah,
like so. And that you can color code that as well, but just remember the default styling on LandUp is the default styling that's requested by the RPA. So that's a FG2. You mentioned one other thing there about livestock troughs as well, Martin. Do you want to explain a bit more about that option?
Yeah, so I think again, just correct me if I'm wrong, but if you've got a catchment sensitive farming officer and let's take the situation where there might have been a stream, if you're fencing a stream off and you can put in a hard base for a trough and also a livestock trough. So you can actually map out the pipe work as well that goes to the trough and the base.
Yeah, so I've only ever done one stewardship properly with the livestock trough options, but I remember we did troughs, then we did the bases for the trough and all the associated pipe work. So just to talk you through those, obviously added one trough there, and I'm just duplicated it to make another trough, and obviously that can be moved around. And then there's some other features which obviously then you want to connect those troughs with pipework, and these are all capital options that are available. So I'm just drawing hypothetically, I mean, I can't remember exactly on Tim's farm where the water troughs are, but I'm adding a line, connecting those two troughs, and then I can obviously associate that line with pipework for livestock troughs as well. Yeah. The plan is starting to come together quite quickly. Just one technical and more administrative thing to say is that every time I'm drawing these capital items, do get in the habit of clicking on the field that it's relevant to before you draw them, because what that's done naturally is each one of these features has got the field ID associated with it. What there is just a bit of troubleshooting, that if I've got this field selected over here, but I then want to draw, you know, my continued livestock troughs, livestock corridors, and I'm going to make these blue in a minute. But because I had that other field selected, it's going to have this has got the incorrect field parcel associated with it. So just be really careful that you're selecting the field first, and then you're drawing them, just as one point of note. So I am just going to quickly add some color to this. So for example, I'm going to make my livestock troughs a blue, my pipework blue, just for this planning stage. And also my hedgerow, just for this planning stage as well. I'm going to make it green. However, when you go to print, if you are using your land app plan to print, make sure you follow the stewardship guidance, which you can find in this bottom right hand panel, which is Countryside Stewardship. Ooh, can't spell. Countryside. This on the mapping guidance, and what it will say is that you need to reset all the styling for all those different options. So just have a read of that if you are going to be using the land app map to submit. Okay, Martin, so we've got some pipe work in. Is there any other options if we want to look at, for example, unless you've got any other thoughts about this field, we could probably split up some more. But
we were talking about the trees earlier, and going back to Alex's conversation, there's quite a generous thing for it's for tree surgery. You can't use it where it's up against a road and it's a health and safety requirement, or a local authority requirement that you work on a tree. But veteran tree surgery, it's one that's I think is underrated, and people forget about it. But it can help.
Yeah, for us novices out here, why would surgery on a veteran tree be beneficial?
If someone you need to employ somebody who really has got the interests of the heart at heart to protect and enhance the life of the tree, but it can take off diseased limbs and that sort of thing, and if it rebalances a tree, it can help extend its life. We've got a local estate here who's done some wonderful work, who've have actually put insect traps inside some veteran trees, and it's absolutely incredible the biodiversity that they will sustain. And just it's not for anything to do with what we're mapping now, but the Woodland Trust again have got a part of their website which has got ancient, veteran and significant trees mapped as a public resource where anyone can go on, and quite a few of my clients have now become more interested in their veteran and significant trees. And in Shropshire, in the AOMB, we've got trees, Scots pines, which mark the old drovers' routes, and whilst it's not a stewardship thing, there is an interest there, and it's quite nice if you can weave that into the design of any stewardship plan.
Yeah, so the ancient woodland map, we've expressed interest in hosting that on Land App, because that would be another good data layer to get in. Alex, I can see you've come to join. Have you got something to add?
Well, yeah, I think I agree. Tree surgery is great. I mean, as far as I think sometimes the perception of disease in trees is always a negative thing, whereas I would say that an element of disease in veteran trees is actually very natural. And if you look at some of the sort of most fantastic ancient trees, disease, whether it be sort of fungi or whatever else, has actually led to the elements of dead wood, which is supporting all of the invertebrates. So I think disease can be a good thing. I mean, I couldn't agree more about the tree surgery. And for example, there's scope to, not even with old trees, but there's scope to do tree surgery to, for example, pollard a tree, which itself can then potentially extend the life of the tree into the sort of far distant future. So yeah, creating a different form of tree. So yeah, I think it's a good point about tree surgery.
Yeah, thanks, Alex.
But they've got the coppicing bankside trees is one that the pollarding works particularly well for.
Yeah,
absolutely, particularly on sort of the likes of Alder. I mean, for example, the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust did a lot of work where they coppiced bankside trees on the tributaries of the River Wye, essentially allowing a bit more light in. And obviously, it's a balancing act with bats, which obviously like tree corridors, but also doing a bit of coppicing of bankside trees, potentially allow a bit more light in, benefit some of the weed and invertebrates.
And it also has the effect in some situations of improving root growth on things like alder and willow, and which can help with stabilization, especially if you take the livestock the pressure off by fencing off and buffering bankside. It's a good option to look at.
Yeah, I think what you want to do is encourage as much soil cover as possible and keep those banks stable, but you also want to keep the longevity of the trees, and the overshading can also be an issue. So it's keeping the roots in a healthy form without overshading the river to a point. So yeah, I think bankside coppicing.
I see you've turned on. It looks like the layers for flood zone, is it?
Yeah, I was just trying to. So I've been down in this field with Tim a couple of times, and I know he's got a main watercourse here. So I've looked at where the flood zones are for this field. I know this is a triple SI wetland that they've just had a survey done to it. But there's definitely some capital works that will hopefully come off the back of that survey, which hopefully Tim can tie into his stewardship plan. So you mentioned bankside coppicing, so I was just having a play with that. Just to kind of steer the conversation now, we've done a bit of grassland, some good capital options, including your fences and your hedgerows. One little trick that we've started seeing more and more users use is basically making your fields rectangle. And this will hopefully tie into what Alex was talking about, is that, for example, this is currently in Lucerne, but you've got this, these strange corners that when you're using machinery, just reduce the efficiency of the field. And so we were on I'm not sure if any of you joined the estate call with Nick from Cowdrey, but he said his team have started drawing rectangles using the rectangle function and trying to make the biggest rectangle they can and kind of deeming that their cropped area. Obviously, this is hypothetical, and you can obviously edit this accordingly, but it is a really nice tool to then say, right, actually, if I just was farming in rectangles, how much land could I potentially give to a stewardship option, or to, like you were saying, a more long-term wild edge? So have you ever been using that process, Martin?
Oh, it's a new one to me, and I really like it. I've done it freehand, and it's as some auto steer and things comes in to tractors, and it's becoming more mainstream, and you can buy sort of quite simple and cheap auto steer systems now. It makes a lot of sense, time saving, rather than fiddling. How long do we spend fiddling around trying to work the headland out when really we could be putting it to use for wildlife and biodiversity?
Can I just chip in there with a question? You've drawn your rectangle, Dan. Can you then alter the width of the rectangle so it's a multiple of for example, the sprayer boom width or whatever else?
Absolutely, I'm glad you asked. So yeah, on the right hand side here, at the moment this is 430 meters long, and then 176. So, and if anyone could do quick maths, a multiple of 30 would be, if I made that 180, that's gonna be slightly too wide. So it might be that I have to go down to 150.
You could then drag the rectangle so that it fits. You could actually use the move feature as long as you remember to turn it off, which I sometimes forget. But if you you can just move the whole rectangle.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a multiple of 30. It might be 32. But yeah, exactly. So I've got a rectangle that's floating. There's a multiple of, and I can then adjust. And actually, going down to 30 might mean I can make this slightly longer as well. I can get a bit more growing width in it. And there we are. That's get back and edit, move. So yeah, that's pretty good actually. If I was Tim, if you're watching, Tim, there we are. There's a pretty efficient corridor for farming. And then, you know, what have we got? And you can really play around with that. We've got 7.2 hectares of land, a multiple of 30, and then 6.49 could go into a stewardship option. So for example, maybe you don't want to put it all into the AB9 that Alex was speaking about, but it could be that you want to put in this area. Alex, one thing that I don't think you mentioned, is there a particular soil type or, you know, direct sunlight that the AB9 benefits from, or is it kind of wet corners?
Right, okay, so I would say, I mean, with AB9, winter bird food, you're obviously growing a crop for birds. So the ideal is actually that you're having relatively sort of fertile soils, sort of which are, you know, fairly open, i.e. it's going to grow a better crop. If you're on something which is poor soil, thin soils, I mean, I'm based in Dorset, and so for example, on, you know, areas of a field which are very thin, chalky soils, that would be less suited to AB9 winter bird food. But for example, the flower-rich margins and plot areas might suit that brilliantly. Because obviously with a thinner, chalkier soils, you've got less fertility, generally speaking. With less fertility, you then get a broader range of wildflowers with it. So with the winter bird food, ideally sort of fairly, you know, well, if it's not sort of your best soils, obviously, but not absolutely wretched soils, because if it's, you know, wretched soils, then it's also going to be potentially a pain to establish as well.
Yeah.
Dan, whilst you've got those the flood, I see you've just put the contours from the OS on, but while you've got the flood zones, there's a feature that I've used in the data layers which gives you the catchments for various rivers, and that's a really interesting one because it you know, it means there you go, you've got the catchment areas. You might have to zoom out to find out, but if you hover over the particular area, it gives you the correct name of the catchment. So here we are, we've got Y there. So it's amazing how many farmers that I come across aren't really aware of where their water ends up. You know, it's you know, rightly so, they're very focused on their own parcel of land. But I think Hugh, you will have come across farmers who sort of, they don't really know where their water ends up, and it's quite an interesting exercise to go through with people.
Yeah, and I think as we move towards ELM and local nature recovery and landscape restoration, farming and isolation is not going to be, you know, the done thing as we move forward. It's going to be more, okay, how do I work as a partnership with my neighbors, connecting up my habitats, but also trying to improve or trying to reach an end goal, which could be, for example, improving water quality. And so, yeah, understanding what water body you're in, you know, how you interact with that water body. You know, are you directly on the, you know, the main water course, which Tim is, you know, down here, or are you higher in the catchment? But yeah, really understanding your context is quite an important step into designing quite a nice stewardship scheme. And obviously there's help out there. There's, you know, flags obviously represented here, but there's a number of other organizations that can support you in designing a scheme. Most, you know, there's many of people on this call who are actually advisors rather than the farmers themselves. So yeah, understanding the context of either you and your client, understanding the impact of your current practices, and then designing a management plan using either stewardship or, you know, future schemes to reduce that impact is what we all need to do. And there are financial incentives out there. It's just trying to pick and choose which one's the best one to do. It can be quite tough.
The other thing that I've used in quite often, when you look at the prescriptions, there are requirements to record keep, which can quite often be in the form of a photograph. And I really like the ability, and perhaps Dan, you could show it better than I can explain it, where you can actually take a photograph, add it in, add it on, and also we've produced a countryside stewardship plan, and on behalf of a landowner, and he's got some of the land out on a grazing license, and being able to relate that information of the prescriptions to the grazier so that he fully understands what he's trying to achieve, and is a really good feature.
Yeah, so to talk through that, and actually it kind of feeds into a mobile app that we're developing at the moment, is that maintaining evidence is critical for farming generally, but we want to make it as easy as possible. So at the moment, what you can do is you can upload photos to certain projects. So you can either upload a photo directly to my stewardship, or what I tend to find is quite easy is just create a blank project, call it photo evidence, and upload all your photos there. It just gives you the ability to turn it off.
Oh, I like that.
Just to show the workflow then, Martin, is basically click the upload photo. You might have to pay witness to my messy desktop on it. Well prepared. So these are 3 photos that I took on Tim's farm in 21. I choose the photo, and what that does is it not only uploads the photo to the land app, it also drops a photo icon of where that photo is taken. So as we're building up a stewardship plan or maintaining evidence, for example, if I had planted a hedgerow along here, that photo is going to be critical to proving to DEFRA or any inspection RPA inspectors you have that you've done it. And I know
they like to see, with the photographs, they like to see the direction, that they can ask for the direction. So I on mine, I just added an arrow to show it's quite easy to add an arrow to just above the photograph and show you the direction the photograph was taken in.
Yeah, that's a good point. So this one, I'm pretty sure, is facing that way. So yeah, you've got a photo, and then just to show you now, I've got, because it's a separate layer, I can toggle that one off and have it as a separate evidence. And what we have found and what people are finding is doing these online, if you are doing any online stewardship application planning, doing it with photo evidence after you've gone on a walk is a really nice way to either relate to your client or to a neighbor or friend, saying, look, here is where I'm considering planting a new hedge. What do you think? Type questioning. That's really useful.
We talked earlier, jumping back slightly, and we're on that line now where we split a field. And of course, if you have split a field, you're going to have to do an RLE1. And I know, Jan, we didn't discuss this beforehand, but I did an RLE1 plan last year, did several of them, submitted them as a PDF to the RPA, and no one's going to believe me, but they actually updated it within 48 hours of me submitting the email. They had changed it on the SBI, and I actually tweeted the RPA. I just said, look, credit where it's due. So it's using the land app to produce an RLE1. I think they just grabbed them off the top of the pile because it's so easy for them to use that information.
Yeah, well, great. I didn't know that, and Tom might have picked it up on Twitter, but yeah, no, that's great to hear. And just to make people aware of that, just to show you that workflow, my hypothetical situation, I'm splitting this field. All I would do is I would right click, copy to project, and I'd create a new project and choose the RLE1 form like so. And so what that's done is that's just brought the field in question through. And then I would edit the field to show how it needs to be represented on my SBI number. So it could be a split like so. And then you could just label those fields with their, either if they're giving a new field number. And actually that's another thing to show really quickly, is that you can automatically detect what the field number should be using the coordinate system. So I can give this a new field number, submit that directly to the RPA, either through, did you export it or did you send it as a PDF?
I sent it as a PDF, and one of the things is they like to see it as a green line. So where the split is, I changed the color to green, and that ties in with the guidance notes. The guidance notes as they were last year, at least. They like to see the line, the actual line, split line, as green.
Okay. So I think a workshop on RLE1s might be quite useful. And if that would be useful to you, do feel free to put it in the chat that you would like to hear a bit more about RLE1s and
make it wider. That's it. Brilliant, you've done it.
So just, I've noticed a question from John, and it's relevant to what I've just done. The answer to your question is yes, John. What happens is when you split a field, what it does is it maintains the same field number. So basically I've split field 9429 into two, but they both retain their same field identity because they still are part of that same field. However, as we've just mentioned, if you want them to have a new field number, so I split this into two and they want to be separate fields, you need to, as part of your RLE1 submission, tell the RPA what the two new field numbers will be within that process. Okay, the final point, just to come back, and then we're, I think, ready to go on to a quick overview of the updates from Land App, and then also any Q&A, and I can see the chat, there's a couple of things coming through on the chat function. Just to note, you mentioned grassland eligibility form there, Martin, is that you can, alongside uploading photo evidence, is you can store PDF documents or online documents to certain field parcels. So for example, and tell me if I'm wrong, Alex, is that for your GS2 and your GS6, if you're going into it, your species rich grassland requires a grassland eligibility form, which looks like this. GS2, GS5, GS6. And what you can do is once you've completed it, you can actually associate that file with a certain feature or parcel within your Land App map. So I can see you've come on, Alex. Hopefully it's with good news.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Great. So I've clicked on my field parcel, which is currently going into GS2. I then choose this Documents tab and I add a new document, and this can be my grassland eligibility form and a link to where I'm storing it, like so. So now, whether myself or any of the collaborators come on, potentially, you know, any inspectors as well, is not only have you got your permanent grassland, you've also stored the grassland eligibility within that permanent grassland. So you're not filing it away, you know, in a folder, you're filing it spatially as well. So it just keeps that information more relevant, locally stored.
The one we had was we were involved with some commons and some upland, and the graziers, it's a lenient grazing supplement. I can't remember the codes, but there's a requirement to keep the number of stock, you know, for each month. And all we do is we do it as an Excel spreadsheet, and then we just click it with the particular, add it to the parcel.
Great. Yeah, I think that's a really powerful way of doing it, and you know, it's just a way of keeping relevant things in the right place, and especially when it comes to that audit trail. You know, year 4 comes around and the inspectors like your grassland eligibility form. What we hope is that we can provide a place to store that.
Another one, Dan, again on uplands, because obviously we're looking at Sussex here, but you know, part of the stewardship or requirement now is to produce a wildfire plan, and that's a discussion for another day. But using the Land App, I produced a wildfire plan quite quickly with access gates and water for firefighting, and I've then communicated that with the fire brigade. They call it the fog group up in Greater Manchester and Derbyshire. So it's all filed, and that's all driven on the Land App. And of course, being really clever, you could then export it as a GeoJSON file, and I think we're not far away being able to give that information to the fire brigade for a wildfire situation.
Yeah, well, lots of other use cases. Maybe we'll hold that one for another day. But yeah, great to hear about these, and do share your stories, because we like to hear how the Land App's being used. Just to quickly then kind of round off, and Martin, thank you so much for your time there. Really appreciate it. If there's any questions that you have for Martin or anyone else that's been presenting, do pop them in the Q&A function, and we'll hopefully get around to them in a moment. I just wanted to spend 5 minutes just quickly updating people on any updates we've made relevant to stewardship. Just to show you in text form to start with, we've added a farm environment record template. So this is the appendix to your stewardship that just shows your existing land use, your farm environment record. We've added payment rates, which you may have spotted during that, which are on the right-hand panel. And we've added some options as well as some functionality around the printing, as well as the data layers analysis. So I'll just quickly show you those in hopefully 2 to 3 minutes, just so you guys can have a play, and there should be a full product update being released fairly soon. So just to show you, we've got a new project template called the Farm Environment Record. Hopefully you're all familiar with it. It's one of the ones that you guys have probably been doing with your crayons, but now you can work it just like a basic payment project. So I've hit create project, I've scrolled down to Farm Environment Record. I then create from, and you choose which of your 2 boundaries or which of your 2 imports you want. If I had parcels, it would be there. I'd always recommend using land covers, because land covers breaks up where the scrub and the woodland is, which you need to note within your fir map. I'm not going to do a full fir map for the Norney farm, but just to show you some of the functions is that I've got quite a few data layers on. Some of them are relevant actually. If I turn on my historic, where's particular size, for example, some of the relevant ones, but they work exactly the same as BPS. You select a field parcel, hit the change button, and all of the different, I think there's 23 or so options available, or 21 options. Some of them are polygons. So for example, where your woodland is, all of them need to be field parcel, but you choose your option, either a whole field option, or you use the split tool. And again, I'm just being very arbitrary. This could be where my scrub is. Soil erosion risk has to be flagged up. So for example, this bit that's down the hill could be in soil erosion. That needs to be flagged up, and it should all be styling, as you can see, based like the fir map. So there's historic, for example, areas, etc. Again, there's lines associated with that as well. So I know down here we've got, I can probably find it accurately if I needed to, but there's some different rivers and stream options, for example, and your hedgerows, you can either copy them from here or draw them on as well. So do have a play with the fir template. It's one of the most requested templates we have, so do have a play. Any feedback you've got, let us know. So I think that, yeah, there's should be all the different options you need. So that's the fir template. That again can be exported as a PDF or as a data file if you need to move it to any other software, and labels, etc. work in the same way, and so does the print function. Quickly back to stewardship. So stewardship has got just a couple of main updates. Firstly, that due to popular demand, we've added these 2 attributes in the right-hand panel. So as you're doing your mapping, the value and the payment rate now appears on the right-hand side. Before, you used to have to go to the table view to see the payment rate, and that's fully dynamic. So you can see it's 2,500 if I go to GS2, split that in half, and then it's 1,100. So that's fully on the fly, and that should work for all your features, including your lines. So I planted this hedgerow, for example, which is nearly 300 meters, I'd get paid £3,400. So that would hopefully just give you the transparency you need to create those scenarios for either you or your clients without having to constantly export the table view. Just some new options. Again, I think this year we've had some good upland wood pasture. So DEFRA released the the management of upland wood pasture, the restoration of upland wood pasture, and the creation of upland wood pasture. So those 3 are the main options. And I think there's a couple of capital items, such as slurry. I think there's some new slurry options. The slurry scraper is a new one. So we're going to have a full update being released tomorrow, I think. Oh no, what's tomorrow? Saturday, Monday, where we will explain all the options. But hopefully every option that's available on stewardship is now available on the land app with the new pricing logic associated with it. So like Alex said, GS2, for example, has gone from £90 to £132. So that should all be reflected. And just as a note, that's retrospective as well. So if you completed a plan last year, all of your pricing would have updated to match this year. And so you don't need to do anything, that will all be automatically updated. I think, unless I've missed anything, updated print functionality. We might, in the name of time, hold that, but we'll put it in the update. There's just some new print functionality that we're explaining in the update around the detail of the base map and the flexibility around the legend and the border widths, etc. But I think in the name of time, Tom, I welcome you to come off mute and lead a Q&A session with us.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much, Dan, and thank you to the three of you panelists as well. I was really enjoying actually just listening to that and seeing the land app being used. And Alex, you were coming in and giving your feedback, and the same with you, Martin. It's just really nice to see that the platform we're all in different parts of the country, north, east, southwest. I think the four of us are. So it's nice to see that we're all able to kind of use the platform here like that, and hopefully some of you got some good ideas there. In terms of questions, Dan, we don't actually have that many, so we might be able to wrap up a bit early or talk about something else if we want to. Question from William, and this is probably something that's probably important for you to talk through, Dan. If you are doing countryside stewardship maps using the land app, can these be submitted to the RPA instead of the maps which come in the application pack? And I think William's a bit worried about the maps not being official enough for the countryside stewardship process. So if you talk through that, that'd be great.
Yeah, good question, William. And it's taken us a little while, but last year and the year before, land app maps were used as supporting evidence for a stewardship application. Just bear in mind that the Annex 2 form, which is your spreadsheet, which includes all of the options and the price is what your stewardship is awarded on. The maps are just supporting evidence that the government DEFRA uses if they need it, or the RPA uses if they need it. So to answer your question, yes, you can use land app maps instead of hand drawing your option maps using the crayons and printing them out. To caveat that, you have to make sure that you follow the guidance, and within that there's a couple of key things to add. Everything needs to be labeled and colored correctly. So just a reminder, I've for example, these options, this AB9, I've changed the style myself. So actually you need to remember to reset the style, because it's the style that's default is what they need. So all of the arable options, AB 1 through 16, however many there are all yellow, for example. Just make sure you got the reset styling, follow that guidance, and yeah, we've got lots of examples of people doing that. Within there as well, within the countryside stewardship guidance, there's also the printing element. Just make sure you're printing to the right scale, that all your options are labeled with not only the option code, but the area. There's just a couple of things that unfortunately we haven't fully automated. We want to, but you have to take responsibility to make sure you're following all this. But yeah, just to reiterate, the stewardship application is dictated on the annex form, which you need to complete offline of land app. You can obviously use the table view to get that information, but you need to make sure that's correct and there isn't any areas where you're over claiming or double claiming. That's down to you, so do make sure. But yes, you can avoid using colouring crayons with this countryside stewardship template and the farm environment record template.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Dan. It's good to know. So William says thank you there in the chat. So please feel free at this point to ask any more questions. We do have a few more minutes, and if there's no questions that come up, then happy to open the floor back up to Martin, Alex, and Hugh if any of them have any concluding points. And very happy for all of you to turn your cameras back on, and big thank you all for coming today. It was really useful, and I'm sure we'll get some great feedback from this that I can pass on to you as well. So if there is any concluding thoughts, then now's the time, and that applies to you as well, Dan.
Yeah, well, one thing is just around other habitats like buffering, the wild edges, etc. There'll be more guidance to come in the near future, so do keep your ears out to that. But yeah, just to reiterate your comments, Tom, and obviously thanks to you as well for setting up these webinars. I think they're really valuable, not only just for us to reach out and have conversations with our users, but also to demonstrate some of the more nuanced sticking points that we're hopefully going to iron out as well.
Dan, one from me. Sorry, it's me again. But doing a stewardship option and then copying that over and then changing it to perhaps an SFI or Elm, and then you can really start to play tunes on looking at which one's giving you the best option, especially now that you've got this super function. It gives you real time, total for each parcel of what the revenue is going to be.
Yeah, good point, Martin. Actually, just to demonstrate what that looks like is I've completed a Countryside Stewardship. I can actually just duplicate that Countryside Stewardship into a sustainable farm incentive template. What it will do is it will, obviously the stewardship options get removed, but you keep all the shapes that you previously defined. And so it might be that then using this template, you can then add your certain stewardship options. So for example, with this going into GS2, it might be that you're putting that into a soil standard of advanced. As a note, the dynamic payment doesn't add on this side yet. The developers are just, I think that's on the next list, but the payment rate for those options, and there are, let me just put in a couple more just to make it a slightly more grassland. Let me just say I'm doing stocking density management. And then once you've completed that, the payment's available on that form as well. So you can get a high level overview of your SFI payments as well.
And then the one I've done is I've exported this type of table to an Excel spreadsheet, which is easy to do. And then just using your Excel skills, or in my case, no skills, I've managed to sum a column, and it all right, the functionality is not there yet on the SFI, but it's fairly easy to do yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's probably a good time, and I know Tom's going to want me to do this, is plug next week's webinar, which is specifically all around the SFI template. We're going to be talking about SFI, how the pilots are going, and we've managed to secure one of the DEFRA. We've got a voice from DEFRA who's going to come and speak to us as well for 20 minutes about the progress of the scheme. So if anyone's interested in SFI as part of a pilot, either the SFI 2022 or part of a wider pilot, would recommend next Friday come join the webinar. Be a slightly different format, but hopefully just as engaging.
Yeah, brilliant. And also, as well as that, once you leave this webinar, as Dan said at the beginning, we do have a few questions. One of those questions is, what would you like to see next time? So, you know, if we, you know, we're going to drag Hugh back for another Wild Edges webinar within the next couple of weeks, I'm sure. You know, if we want to do something else with Martin and Flag with Alex, and please feel free to, you know, just guide us on where we're going and what information you're getting access to. Really happy to host as many of these as possible, because it's fun for us, and I think it's we like this on our Friday afternoon, Dan, don't we? Just more of a conversation and have a little chat to end the week. Everyone out there remote working, so it's nice to get everyone together, at least in some format. So yeah, welcome your suggestions. Hugh, Alex, any final thoughts? Any other shameless plugs of where people can find you and get in touch and yeah, over to you.
Well, for me, just to thank you for inviting me. Thank you everyone else for listening. I assume you were listening. Yeah, actually, just the second part, as in watching the demo. I mean, we're all, you know, both on a practical day-to-day level, but also on a kind of tech level, always focusing on our own plot, and rightly so, as Martin said in his thing. But actually, the missing thing, and the whole point of this, what's so brilliant about Land App, but also landscape scale thinking, is suddenly you begin to, you know, visualize your neighbors or near neighbors, or and think about where water flows and what affects what, and you know, if we could all begin to see, you know, how we fit into a landscape scale, it becomes incredibly interesting, but also makes the whole job of landscape recovery and what we're trying to achieve easier. So it's really good. I mean, just very interesting for me, just looking at a different landscape somewhere else. I know it's only a demo, but it's, you know, the more of these there are, and the more people that join, and the better for all of us, for nature recovery. So yeah, I'm ready to play a role whenever needed. Give you the romantic overview, but thank you anyway.
Yeah, and equally, thanks from me as well.
Brilliant. Well, we'll stop the recording there. I just press stop. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Have a good weekend.